everybody, welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today here on the channel, we're going to be talking about 2021's Dune Part 1 and its 2022 4K Blu-ray. So I figured with Dune Part 2 coming out really soon, there was no better time than to talk about Dune Part 1 than right now. So Dune Part 1 was originally released in October of 2021 after numerous delays because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but this movie ended up being a box office hit, making over $430 million at the box office at a time when a lot of people weren't going to the movies. But this is one you had to see on the big screen in IMAX because it was shot with IMAX cameras and it was just gorgeous to look at. It sounded amazing, and there's no reason to think that this movie wouldn't have been a hit, but you wouldn't know that at the time because this was seen as a pretty big risk for Warner Brothers. They were very worried about it. That's why it wasn't even called Dune Part 1 at the time. It was just called Dune. They really buried the fact that this was a Part 1 to a 2-part film. They really wanted to make sure that we got asses in the seat and people were seeing this movie, and when they did, they were not disappointed, even if this film does feel incomplete without Part 2. So this wasn't even the first time they tried to make Dune for the big screen. They tried again in 1984 with David Lynch's Dune. You know, that's mainly because in the 1980s, everybody wanted their own Star Wars, despite the fact 1977 Star Wars took inspiration from this 1965 novel. It is very obvious when you watch Star Wars that they took a lot from Dune.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
And that's why when you watch Dune in 2021, and I remember hearing this at the time, how many people were comparing it to Star Wars. Even critics were saying, oh, it just feels like an adult version of Star Wars. Well, Star Wars took it all from Dune. That's what people have to realize, is a lot of the aspects of Star Wars came from Dune. You know, especially when we're talking about the economies, all these different planets, all these different houses, even shows and books like Game of Thrones clearly took a lot from the 1965 Dune novel. And rightfully so, it is one of the greatest novels that ended up actually starting a franchise of novels, so it's really understandable why a lot of these sci-fi epics would take a lot from Dune. But we're seeing the original one brought back to the big screen.
I didn't understand a one word you said.
And then the first part of this, letting us flesh out these characters a lot more, not trying to cram it into one film, I think was a fantastic idea. But like I said, it does feel very incomplete when we get to the end of this. But this movie is 2 hours and 35 minutes long, and it makes great use of its runtime. It is a fantastic film. Timothée Chalamet plays Paul Atreides. He's the future of House Atreides. His father is played by Oscar Isaac. He is the head of House Atreides. His mother, though, she comes from a very special background of people who have what they call the Voice, which is very similar to the Star Wars franchise as the Force. This unseen ability that numerous people have. It's very possible that Timothée Chalamet might be the future. He might fulfill the prophecy. He might be the one. That's what his mother's side is going to be testing him for. We see that very early in this film. So very similar to a lot of other franchise leads like Harry Potter, The Matrix, and then, of course, Star Wars with Luke Skywalker, Neo, Harry Potter himself. All of them, they're the chosen one. They're the one. They're going to bring balance to the Force. They're going to be the one that's going to save the day. And Timothée Chalamet's character is being set up to be the chosen one as well. And Timothée Chalamet at this point, and, you know, he's starting to really come into his own. We just saw him in Wonka. But in 2021, I wasn't the biggest Timothée Chalamet fan. They're really getting him in line to be the next leading man, the next Leonardo DiCaprio. And just like Leonardo DiCaprio, it feels like this is him just getting his footing under him still. He's got the looks. He's got the charm. I just don't think the acting ability is 100% there. Like, if you go back and watch young Leonardo DiCaprio, watch him in movies like Gangs of New York or The Aviator, like, it's there, the bones are there, but we haven't quite perfected it yet. He just feels a little bit too young. Now, Timothée Chalamet's character in this film, he's supposed to be a young man still learning, so we still get that, but I just always felt like when I watched this movie, and I watched this for the 4th time now, like, something is just missing there. Now, some of the dialogue in this film as well, of course, we're talking about certain things like spice. You know, it can come off a little bit cheesy. Even actors like Jason Momoa, who appears in this movie, or Josh Brolin, even them delivering certain lines of dialogue, it just sounds a little bit cheesy and ridiculous. But luckily enough, Denis Villeneuve shot himself a fantastic film here, and the production design is just a 10 out of 10 perfection. I mean, set design, the clothes that everybody's wearing, the attention to detail is just absolutely gorgeous. World building is what Denis Villeneuve knows how to do. Like, he made this movie, Sicario, Blade Runner 2049, Prisoners. Like, he just just knows how to create these beautiful looking films, and then when he gets into world building like this, he really created something that you had never seen in film before. Yes, he is going off the source material, but this is very much his creation. You can see that he's paying homage to such David Lean films like Lawrence of Arabia. This does feel like a continuation of those beautiful vistas in Lawrence of Arabia. You know, they shot that in 70mm film, so everything just feels big and epic, and this does feel like your modern day epic. Yes, we're adding a sci-fi element to it, and that just all fleshes out so well on the big screen. If you saw this in IMAX theaters, it just looked gorgeous. It sounded gorgeous. The Hans Zimmer score just matches everything perfectly. You know, you start to really care about these characters. That's why splitting it into 2 parts was a great decision. Like, you really get to flesh out Jason Momoa and Josh Brolin's characters. Those 2 characters I thought were great in this film. Jason Momoa especially. You know, Jason Momoa, he's kind of known as this lovable, muscle-bound freak.
Let's not argue in front of the children.
But really, he plays his character so well in this film, you actually end up really caring about him, and then what ends up happening to him in this film, it kind of gets you emotionally. And then obviously a lot of people were disappointed at the time because we didn't have too much Zendaya in this film. We're gonna really have a lot more of her in part 2 because this movie does build up to a conclusion, just like a lot of movies we saw in 2023, like Fast X, Across the Spider-Verse, and then Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. We had to end this one on a cliffhanger, and it feels very incomplete. It feels like we're about to get into part 2, and then the movie just ends. But you know what? There is enough great scenes throughout this entire film, a ton of eye candy, that you don't really leave the film being disappointed, despite the fact that it does feel like a part 1. It feels like we had to build up Paul throughout this film. We had to have him learn as much as he possibly could, and we didn't have to have it happen in an unrealistic amount of time. No, using the full 2 hours and 35 minutes to build up his character, build up this world, because there is a lot to understand in this world, its economy, how everything works, and it doesn't feel like one big exposition dump. They actually let you learn all this stuff naturally. It might be a little bit confusing at the very beginning, but they do enough to explain it all throughout the entire film while also keeping it entertaining and not feeling like you're getting beaten over the head with a lot of facts and stuff you need to understand. I've heard people complain about this with Christopher Nolan films, that they just feel too exposition heavy. I kind of disagree with that. I think you need to learn a lot of stuff while you're watching sci-fi films. You know, this is science fiction. Yes, it's operating kind of in the real world, but it's operating in its own little world. They all have their different types of economies, rules, you know, weapons, and to explore all that in a film like this and not have it feel boring or feel like you're getting beaten over the head with fact after fact after fact. No, I think they fleshed it out perfectly. I do think that this is one of the best films we've gotten over the last 10 years. I think it's just so well made. It's actually not even my favorite Denis Villeneuve film. I still think my favorite Denis Villeneuve film is Sicario. I think that's really where he mastered his art, but all of his films just always feel big and epic. They have these bombastic scores, great sound design, and Dune was no different. It really leaves you itching for part 2. That's why I cannot wait to check this one out in beautiful IMAX when it finally comes to theaters on March 2nd. But Dune Part 1 is a fantastic film on its own, and if you haven't seen it in a while, I can still highly recommend it. If you haven't seen it at all, this is definitely a huge must-see, especially if you have any plans to see Dune Part 2, and maybe you want to check out this Warner Brothers 4K Blu-ray that we're going to talk about right now. Well, here it is, Dune Part 1 on 4K Blu-ray. This was originally released back in 2022, and there's actually a lot of fascinating stuff about this 4K Blu-ray. First of all, one of the big things is this is a Warner Brothers release. Warner Brothers never uses Dolby Vision. I do not know how they got Dolby Vision on this one, but for some reason, this does feature Dolby Vision on the 4K Blu-ray and HDR10. Usually, Warner Brothers only does HDR10. Maybe this is some sort of deal they made with Denis Villeneuve to get this movie brought to 4K Blu-ray. He's like, I gotta have Dolby Vision on it. It's kind of like how Christopher Nolan refuses to use Dolby Atmos with his films. Like, this 4K Blu-ray does have a really, really good Dolby Atmos track on it, but when you were talking Christopher Nolan, even when he was with Warner Brothers, they still had HDR10 on it. And this film wasn't actually shot on film. It was shot using IMAX cameras, but it was shot using IMAX digital. But that means that you would think that it would have the aspect ratio kind of varying like a lot of other IMAX release films, especially like we're talking about Christopher Nolan when he shot on IMAX with The Dark Knight Rises, and then Interstellar, and then obviously obviously IMAX cameras going forward, we would see the changing aspect ratio throughout the film. Well, when it comes to this 4K Blu-ray, it's only going to be viewed in the 2.39 aspect ratio. There are no varying aspect ratios. It doesn't have the IMAX scenes enhanced, which is very disappointing. I don't know why that decision was made at the time. I feel like it was a very big missed opportunity, but it doesn't take too much away from this 4K Blu-ray. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Before we go any further, let's look at this packaging. I have the regular slipcover version right here. You come underneath, same artwork. You come inside, you get a Blu-ray, and you get a 4K Blu-ray. All of your extras, of course, are going to be on that Blu-ray, but that Blu-ray will still have that beautiful sounding Dolby Atmos track. And speaking of actually the audio tracks, there are numerous audio tracks in different languages. There are numerous choices for subtitles. I always want to point that out whenever anyone ever releases a 4K Blu-ray, and they give you language options. That way it makes it feel more inclusive for everyone. Not everybody speaks English, so I really do appreciate the fact that they give us so many different languages so anyone can come to this film and not have to turn subtitles on. But if you do want to turn subtitles on, they give you so many different options there as well. Usually Paramount is the king of this, but I really do appreciate Warner Bros. Giving us so many different options there. And then of course, when we get into the audio, how does this Dolby Atmos track sound? Well, it's perfect. It's almost reference quality audio. And when I heard this in the IMAX theaters, I knew it was mixed so well. We get that amazing Hans Zimmer score that just matches up to the film perfectly. Great sound design, great sound mixing. That's one thing I was looking at when I was watching this. You know, it's just mixed so well. Like, the sound design is perfect. We're creating a world here, so we're getting different sound effects that you never heard before. Denis Villeneuve went in here and he created a world. Him and his team, they created a world, a real lived-in world. This planet that we have never been to, Arrakis, it feels like a real planet. That's how good of a job they did designing this film. And the sound design, the sound mix just translates so well to Dolby Atmos. They made great use of all of your channels, and it just really gets you going. You know, you feel it in your chest because of the bass bumping, especially in the third act as we build up to the conclusion. You really do feel it. I really think they did a fantastic job on this Dolby Atmos mix. Really well done. Like, you could just see where the money went. And then of course that leads us into the visuals. Like I was saying, HDR10 Dolby Vision shot with digital IMAX cameras. I would have loved to see that varying aspect ratio. I know people find that distracting, and I can find it distracting too when we have those quick cuts from the original aspect ratio to the IMAX aspect ratio. You know, your eyes just light up. You're like, oh my god. But then when we cut back to the original aspect ratio and we get the top and bottom black bars, you know, your eyes do take a few seconds to adjust. The quality also dips just slightly, so your eyes have to adjust, but they will adjust, and then you just don't even think about it anymore. So I would have really appreciated the IMAX enhanced scenes, especially since they shot this using digital IMAX cameras. And this was shot in 4K, so this isn't even a 2K intermediate, but it is shot on 4K, so it just looks absolutely gorgeous when you watch this in beautiful looking 4K Blu-ray. No matter what option you choose to go with, whether it be Dolby Vision or HDR10, either way, it just looks absolutely gorgeous. And this film, you know, it's not the most eye-catching film, mainly because we're using a lot of grays, beiges, oranges, you know, very flat colors. And that's because this film, for the most part, takes place on a planet that's just filled with sand. But again, the attention to detail, like sand all over the place. These sets, they're practical for the world that they live in, so a lot of them are just lit by the natural outside light. We can't let too much light in, so this 4K will actually look dark at points, but that's the look they were going for when you're watching the film. And I just think for the film that they were trying to make, it translated so well visually to the 4K format. All the grain in here, it's obviously some digital grain that's used in here to give off that film look. You know, like I said, this film was clearly inspired a lot by Lawrence of Arabia and David Lean big time epics, and I think they captured that look in this film perfectly, you know, bringing it to the modern world and using those digital cameras and the way that they lit these sets, the production design, all of it looks so well. And then when we bring it to Dolby Vision and HDR10, even when you compare it to the Blu-ray, it's just enhanced so much. And that Blu-ray really isn't that bad, but the 4K, you're just gonna get that attention to detail. I mean, I'm talking about when you're looking at their clothes, you could just see every little material on it. I mean, my god, it just looks fantastic. They did a great job with this 4K Blu-ray. It's not quite reference quality. This came out in 2022, so that means it came out the same year as Top Gun Maverick. And when we were talking about Top Gun Maverick coming to 4K Blu-ray, you know, that was like astonishing. I don't think Dune quite hits the levels of that, but it's still a very good 4K Blu-ray. When it comes to the visuals, I just feel like there was a missed opportunity there with the IMAX scenes, but the Atmos track is also fantastic. And like I was saying, they give you so many different options when it comes to audio, so I really do appreciate that. Now, the extras, there are a good amount of featurettes on here that if you probably would have edited them together, you would have ended up with an amazing making of documentary, but unfortunately they kind of separated all into featurettes, which I don't mind. They break down a lot of the stuff in the Dune world. You know, I feel like a lot of people coming to it completely blank, you probably don't understand how this world works, and it might be a little bit overwhelming. Well, those featurettes will really flesh everything out, all the different houses, how that works, how the spice works. All those featurettes will explain that all to you, get into the mindset of the actors, the producers, the production design, the director, all of it. I really love what they did with the featurettes. I just feel like it could have been edited together a little bit better, but, you know, they're going to make it look like there's more on here than there is. I can understand that, but I would have liked a little bit more. I'm hoping when Dune Part 2 comes out, we get a refresher with Dune Part 1, maybe throw back in the IMAX scenes. From what I understand, Dune Part 2 is actually shot a little bit differently. It's going to have a 70mm film run, which the original one was shot completely digitally, so that means that Dune Part 2 was at least shot with film in mind, so it might end up looking a little bit different, but we might end up with like a definitive edition of Dune Part 1 and Part 2, like talking about the story as a whole. Maybe we get interviews with the actors again. I don't know. I'm just thinking about the future here.
Eckhart! Think about the future.
I want to know what they're going to be doing with Dune Part 2 on 4K Blu-ray, even though I haven't seen Dune Part 2 yet, but I'm just really excited about it, and after rewatching Dune Part 1, I just cannot wait for Dune Part 2, and this 4K Blu-ray is definitely one I can recommend you guys check it out, even if you haven't seen it yet. Even if you haven't seen Dune yet, though, the film itself is still really good. I'm pretty sure you can still watch it on Max right now before Dune Part 2 comes out, but if you were to pick up this 4K Blu-ray, how would I score this on a score of 1 to 10? I would actually give it a really solid 8.5 out of 10. It's still really, really, really good, but it does feel like certain things are missing, whether it be more extras or those IMAX enhanced scenes, and it just feels like this could have been the best release of 2022, but they just held back a little bit. But that's not saying that it's a bad release, because it is a fantastic release, and the film itself is really, really good. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it here for me on another episode of Let's Talk. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, turn notifications on, and then after you're done doing all of that, get out in those streets and tell your friends about us. But maybe you want to become a channel member, like our producers tier, where you'll find John Doe Juggalo, Jason Martin, and Mr. Smelly Potato, or you can even become a channel director like Frank's Media and Reviews. Check out his channel as well. And then we also have a Friends of the Channel tier. If you want to help us out that way, we would really appreciate it. But if you got no money to throw our way, we don't mind. We just appreciate you guys checking out this video, and we hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, we'll be seeing you around.